Good day. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Montreal, Canada for Reason to Resist on June 19th, 2025. And today I'm very pleased to be joined again by Ajamu Baraka. Ajamu is an American political activist. In 2016, he was the U.S. Green Party nominee for Vice President of the United States, along with presidential candidate Jill Stein. They got on the ballot in 45 states and received nearly 1.5 million votes. Ajamu currently serves as the national organizer and spokesperson for the Black Alliance for Peace, and he joins us today from New York City. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you so much. One quick correction. I'm no longer the national spokesperson or coordinator. I'm just a member of the coordinating committee of the Black Alliance for Peace and director of their new North-South Project for People-Centered Human Rights.
Please remind me, I'd like to ask you about the latter project before we conclude our discussion today. That's something I think definitely is going to merit some discussion. But before we get there, Ajamu, within the past 24 hours, or within 24 hours, I should say, of Israel launching its war of aggression on Iran, the Black Alliance for Peace issued a powerful statement condemning the Zionist entity. The statement was titled, "The Middle East is on fire because Israeli and U.S. imperialism lit the match." And it began with these words. Overnight, the Zionist entity of Israel escalated its war of aggression against Iran by launching unprovoked attacks on the Islamic Republic. The notion that a rogue ethno-state that is currently carrying out a genocide believes that it possesses the right to determine which countries can and cannot develop a nuclear weapon is both bizarre and egregious, as well as brazenly hypocritical, and further demonstrates that the state of Israel operates firmly within the structures of white supremacy, ideology, colonialism, and imperialism. Iran, like all sovereign nations, has the right to defend itself from aggression and uphold its security in the face of repeated threats and acts of war. This stands in stark contrast to Israel, which operates a settler colonial occupation of Palestine as well as portions of Lebanon and Syria. Now, those were strong words, if ever there were any, and in my own view, entirely warranted. But what I wanted to drill down on, Ajamu, first of all, is, Western governments and the Israeli regime would have us believe that Israel launched this war with apparently the full backing of the West to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. In the view of Black Alliance for Peace, is there any credibility to that claim? And if not, what do you believe? What does the organization believe this war is all about?
There's no credibility at all. We consider that position to be nonsense that is meant to divert attention away from the real objective, which has been the objective of the U.S. and Israeli states for more than 30 years, and that is to control and to contain the power of Iran. If it was about, we believe that if it was only about the issue of nuclear power and a nuclear bomb, then there was an agreement already in place. It seems to us that there's a strange discourse taking place in the mainstream media that seems to have either marginalized or forgotten the fact that you had an agreement between Iran and the U.S. and four other guarantors, and that was called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. In that agreement, you had two things. One was an agreement that Iran would only enrich uranium up to 3.67%. And you had a fairly almost intrusive inspection protocol process in which the IAEA was going to monitor the adherence to the agreement, which they did. The agreement was in place, but what happened? The Trump administration, they basically tore the agreement up. And so we raised the question that if the issue was only about the possibility of a nuclear bomb, and we know that the IAEA said in 2018, when the Trump administration ripped the agreement up, that Iran was in full compliance with all aspects of the agreement, then the baseline of any renegotiation, if you will, should have been the JPOA, But of course, that wasn't the case because the issue isn't a nuclear bomb. The issue is the ability of Iran to be able to defend itself and to stand as the only state in the region that can put a brake on the ambitious ambitions of the U.S. and Israel for complete and total domination of the region. So we see it as a subterfuge, and basically that the real issue is to undermine Iran. And as many U.S. Um, uh, decision makers are sharing over the last couple of days, the real objective is so-called regime change. That's been our position. That has flowed from our analysis.
Now, the international media has been gripped with the question over the last few days of whether the Trump administration is going to become directly and massively involved in this war of aggression on Iran. Of course, it is involved already. The extent and nature of its involvement is unclear, but the fact that it is providing critical assistance in numerous respects to the Zionist entity, I think, is beyond rational dispute. Of course, it could be much more involved, and it could do a great deal more damage to Iran with the military assets at its disposal. And so we have right now this kind of, I tend to think of it as a kabuki theater. Will he, won't he? What's in Trump's mind? Does he know what he's going to do? Is he playing 5D chess and all the rest of that nonsense? Based on what you can see, what do you think is going on inside the Trump administration? And do you believe, based on what you can see, that there's a realistic prospect of Trump dialing down the violence rather than ratcheting it up?
I think the all indications seem to suggest that the Trump administration is probably going to allow itself to be drawn into this conflict. They're going to see this as a somewhat limited participation in terms of providing U.S. assets to strike nuclear facilities, in particular the one that the major one in Fordo. But I think people in the deep state understand that if that happens, and they know there's going to be a retaliation from the Iranians, that now you have the war that they've been angling for more than 30 years. So it's going to be an immediate mission creep, if you will, and that's what makes that possible decision so troublesome, because we're going to see the entire region becoming even more destabilized as a consequence. The Iranians have said and been quite clear that if the U.S. Is drawn directly into the war, we know they're already involved, but in an open way, and that they have no other choice but to retaliate against the U.S. We know that there are a number of vulnerabilities there that they can exploit, including attacking Bahrain and the choke points there in the region that it can disrupt oil flow and the consequences that will have on the U.S. and global economy. So there's some degree of leverage. So some people are hoping that there's some degree of restraint, but it seems like the nature of the decision-making process within the Trump administration is such that it's unpredictable because there seems to be a combination of recklessness and ineptitude. And that's a dangerous combination when you have a state with the kind of power that the U.S. Represents.
As you and I have discussed previously, Ajamu, on this program, Trump postured as the candidate of peace in last year's election, even pontificated about winning the Nobel Peace Prize one day, saying that that was an ambition of his and so forth. Polls that I've seen show that not only the American people as a whole, but Republicans are strongly opposed, at least a substantial majority of them, to a war with Iran. I think that is, my sense is that is the prevailing view within the MAGA movement, not necessarily for humanitarian reasons, but simply they think that this is not a wise use of American resources and could further weaken the country. If Trump does this, what do you think is going to happen to his base? I've heard some, speculation that the base of support for Donald Trump, to the extent it continues to exist, will disintegrate, and that he will be effectively entirely at the mercy of the neocons in American politics and the deep state, with potentially disastrous consequences not only for the American people but for his administration. What do you think is likely to happen to his base of support if he goes down this path?
Well, I think it's a little bit extreme for some people to conclude that it's going to completely result in a disintegration of his base. There will be some elements that will peel off that are very much upset about what appears to be a betrayal on the part of Donald Trump, uh, with the potential of bogging the U.S. down into another what they call endless war. But I think the main base, one of the main bases of MAGA, which is reflected in the evangelical Christians, who many of them are basically Christian Zionists and anti-Semitic because of the theological base of their support for Israel. They're going to remain with Trump. So I see a diminution of support to a certain degree. But I think it's a little bit too easy to conclude that this is going to be the issue that's going to fracture his base. I don't really see that happening. I think that if the war, though, is if the U.S. gets bogged down in the conflict, I think that there will be openings to raise some of these issues and contradictions among the general public and within the MAGA base. But I think initially he's going to be able to hold his base together.
Now, in terms of, uh, I think this is probably an issue of some importance to his base, but certainly one that is of profound importance to the American people as a whole, and that is that the Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution proclaims that it is the Congress that shall have power to declare war. And as I'm sure you've had many opportunities to talk about, this is a requirement of the United States Constitution, which has rarely been observed, if ever, in recent past. Do you see any impetus right now within Congress at all a serious one, a serious initiative to actually require Trump to obtain the authorization of Congress before launching what would undoubtedly be a disastrous war? I understand that Republican Representative Thomas Massey has sponsored some legislation in that regard, and the I've seen a report that it's getting some support from the progressive wing, or the so-called progressive wing of the Democratic Party. Do you think this is a serious initiative, or that it stands any prospect of success?
Well, it really depends on what we might define as serious. I think it will be serious in terms of highlighting this contradiction, this ongoing issue of presidential power as it relates to the deployment of U.S. military forces. This situation here is even a little bit different, I think, than when they deployed against Iraq, even though that was also an illegal intervention. But they made the direct argument to justify that Iraq possessed these weapons of mass destruction that they claim had a direct impact, that represented a direct threat to the United States. Well, the argument being made today that Iran represented a direct and immediate threat to the interests of the U.S. and to U.S. security is not being accepted by many people, especially when you have the obvious discrepancies between what the U.S. intelligence agencies have claimed in their analysis presented back in March, that said basically they see no credible evidence that the Iranians are moving toward developing and weaponizing a nuclear weapon, and that there's no, and even if they were to begin to move, even at the point of having 60% enrichment, it would still take a matter of a few years to be able to weaponize a nuclear device. Now, that is in stark contrast to the kind of hysterical claims being made by Benjamin Netanyahu, picked up by Donald Trump, and Donald Trump, who said that they were only weeks away from a nuclear device. And so people are not buying into the justification, which makes the deployment and possible intervention of U.S. forces even more illegitimate. And that's going to pose a different kind of political dilemma, I believe, for the Trump administration, and even for, and we have to remind people of this, there's still significant elements in the Democrat Party that are basically silent. Why? Because they have been angling for conflict with Iran as long as the Trumpian forces and others. Okay, so they are in agreement with this illegal and unprovoked attack. So it's going to raise some very interesting political discussions in the U.S. as a consequence of this reckless assault, giving a green light to Israel, and the possibility of the U.S. Being drawn directly into the conflict is going to, I think, result in a shift in power within the U.S. domestically, politically, but it's going to further expose the limitations of U.S. military power in the region.
Mm-hmm. Now, on this whole question of Iran's alleged program to develop a nuclear weapon, you mentioned the Democrats and the notable silence of some of them. I recall distinctly that towards the end of the Biden administration, I think this would have been was sometime last year. It was on just before the most recent or the last trip of Netanyahu to Washington before the presidential election, as I recall. And Blinken was running around days before Netanyahu arrived in Washington, proclaiming that Iran was, weeks away or maybe a few months away from developing a nuclear weapon. And he himself, as the Secretary of State at the time, seemed to be setting the stage for an eventual attack on Iran, which is something that Netanyahu obviously has sought for decades. If Kamala Harris had won, I'm asking you to kind of, pull out your crystal ball here, but I'm curious to know what your thoughts are. If Kamala Harris had won the election, do you think we'd be in a different place? Do you think that the Biden administration would be exercising restraint with respect to Iran, or do you think we'd be essentially heading towards a full-blown war in any event?
Well, interesting enough, your question it poses another kind of question for me, and that is, will we be in the same position with Israel if they had won? Because for me, I think that the recklessness and irrationality of the policies of Biden Harris would have been reflected as it relates to Ukraine in a Harris administration. And because of the danger that recklessness posed, we would be in a much more vulnerable, much more dangerous situation vis-a-vis Russia than we would be today with the situation with Israel and Iran. So it wouldn't have mattered in a sense, because the kind of ineptitude and amateurism that I've been raising for the last 7 years is reflective of the policy makers in both parties. The quality of the individuals in the U.S. foreign policy community has been dangerously low, and so there's no telling what would have happened. As it relates to, if let's put Ukraine to the side, if there was a Harris administration in place right now, I don't see any deviation from the trajectory of U.S. policies vis-a-vis Iran. If they would have allowed the Israelis to engage in the activity that they engaged in terms of the attacks on Hezbollah, and the attacks both by Israel and the U.S. in Yemen that significantly weakened some of the forces in alignment with Iran, with the subsequent perception that Iran was now weakened. I think we would see the same kinds of policies emerging, unfortunately. There's no difference when it comes to this issue of Iran, and no difference in terms of the inordinate degree of influence that the Israeli lobby has on U.S. policymakers.
Yeah, and just to add to your excellent list of belligerent acts under the Biden administration towards Iran, there was also, of course, the attack on the Iranian embassy complex in Damascus in April of last year under Biden and Harris, which was, from a legal perspective, clearly an act of war, an almost precipitated one. So I think there's plenty of evidence to support the view you just expressed. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this extraordinary scene we had in the last few days where, Trump was making noises about getting involved, demanding unconditional surrender from the Iranians and telling them to evacuate Tehran, a city of well over 10 million people. And in that context, on Air Force One, he was asked about Tulsi Gabbard's recent testimony before the United States Congress under oath, which was simply a reflection of what was in the annual threat assessment of U.S. intelligence agencies issued earlier this year, that in the assessment of those agencies, the Iranian government is not attempting to develop a nuclear weapon. That was the threat assessment. That was her sworn testimony. So Trump gets asked on Air Force One, well, what do you say about your director of national intelligence's opinion? And he just came right out and blurted, I don't care about what she said.
You've always said that you don't believe Iran should be able to have a nuclear weapon, but how close do you personally think that they were to getting one? Because Tulsi Gabbard testified in March that the intelligence community said Iran wasn't building a nuclear weapon.
I don't care what she said. I think they were very close to having
extraordinary to see this, whether that's something he personally feels or not, to see him openly declare this at this critical point in time was really just wild. And I have two questions for you in that regard. We were told at the beginning, and they're related to each other. We were told at the beginning when Trump was assembling his cabinet that there were kind of two elements within it. There was the neocon element, represented by people like Waltz and Marco Rubio and so forth, and Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary. And then there was the, shall I call it, the element of restraint, which was supposed to be represented by Tulsi Gabbard and J.D. Vance and perhaps one or two others. But the real one, the people who were sympathetic to the Trump administration, but at the same time desirous of seeing an end to all of these wars, really viewed Tulsi Gabbard as their champion. And now she's been openly dissed in the most really disrespectful manner at a critical moment in time by the president. If she is what we've been told she is, what do you think she ought to do, Ajamu, in response to Trump's trashing of her intelligence expertise?
That's going to be a very, very important and I think critical decision for her. I mean, for most self-respecting people, you would probably feel compelled to have to leave the administration, because that was a very disrespectful comment, especially since it did not represent her personal positions, but the positions of the collective intelligence community. And so for him to, in such a cavalier way, to just dismiss that, I think it demonstrated, Dimitri, that, and this happened a lot sooner than I thought was going to happen, that Trump's governing as a neoliberal has now been consolidated. As a neoliberal, as his base might characterize it, a neoliberal globalist. The same thing happened during his first administration, that the Trump administration got a lot of things done. But if you look at the core of those agreements and the policies that were pushed through, including the tax hikes, this is all in alignment with the neoliberal agenda. So he, in essence, governed as a neoliberal. And that is already unfolding in this administration, that basically the tremendous power of this neoliberal state. And I've always argued that people needed to understand that it is the neoliberals that control the U.S. state, and the neoliberals represent the most powerful segments of capital, and that is finance capital, and that the interests that Trump theoretically was supposed to be champion, the interests of national capital, the interests of the middle class, or what we refer to as the petty bourgeoisie, that they were getting the short end of the stick, especially when the tariffs were announced and the detrimental impact they're going to have on national capital. Those elements of national capital that were involved in international trade, primarily the agricultural sector, and those businesses still depended on migrant labor, and still dependent on having some degree of a constraint against the imports, undermining the ability to access and exploit the U.S. Economy. He has now decided that the interests of the globalists in continuing with this lateral transfer of the people's resources from their pockets into the pockets of the military-industrial complex, in order to advance and protect the interests of the globalists, if you will, international capital, trumps, if you will, the interests of his base. And so politically, it's going to be very, very detrimental to the MAGA movement, and the continued consolidation of what some of us are referring to as neo-fascism in the U.S. Either there's going to be a new space for a more effective democratic opposition to this movement, or you're going to have the continuation of anti-democratic decisions that will make the elections in 2026 basically just a meaningless exercise, because real power will still be consolidated in the executive, and the neoliberals would have found themselves even more intractable than they are today. So, people have to understand the terms of struggle in the United States of America. That basically, if you keep your focus on the personality of Trump or Biden or any of these individuals, you're missing the boat. You have to look at the objective class interests and see those conflicts and even contradictions among those elements. Because that has to determine your politics, how you frame your politics, how you frame your messaging, how you develop an opposition. So we're seeing the ineptitude of the MAGA movement, along with the ineptitude of the traditional Democrats, creating political space for opposition. The problem we have, though, is that the left opposition is so weak and so fragmented that we can't take advantage of the fact that the ruling elements cannot rule in the same way. We can't take advantage of that contradiction. And that's a problem, because as they are ruling among themselves, and struggling among themselves, we still see these incredible examples of unity. That even though they're upset with Trump and his European allies upset with Trump and the tariffs, they can still find unity in getting behind a illegal fascist assault on Iran by the U.S. and Israel. All of them seem to be in alignment with that.
And lastly, Ajamu, last month you and I and other activists and anti-imperialists from around the world gathered in Tehran for the Sobe Media Festival. And I recall that you and I, and all of the invitees, spent quite a bit of time on that sprawling state broadcaster complex that the Zionist entity has mercilessly bombed, killing, I understand, a couple of journalists. And for me personally, because it was my first trip, it wasn't for you. I was quite surprised by what I saw. The Iran that I saw in that 1 week there, and admittedly that was just scraping the surface of the country, its culture and its society, was profoundly different from the one that I had read about in the corporate media all my life. You have more experience of the country than I do. If you had, an overarching message to people from the West who haven't actually had the benefit of being in Iran, about what the country is actually like today, how it is different from the narrative that we have been fed. And I realize this is a big question, but perhaps if you could tell us in a summary sort of way, what would be the essence of the message you think people need to hear right now about what Iran is actually like?
Never believe the characterization of any nation as coming from the lips of individuals who can justify a racist genocide in Gaza. They have no standards. They have no legitimacy. They have no framework for judging other cultures. And like yourself, well, my first visit to Iran, I was somewhat surprised. I knew that there was a disconnect between the descriptions of the country and what is reality is really revealed. But I was pleasantly surprised with what I saw. I remember, and I thought it was you, but maybe it wasn't. That we were on the bus going to a meeting, and you or someone said, "You know what, Ajamu? I just realized we've been here like a day. I haven't seen a policeman." And we talked about the fact that when you go and you travel into the U.S. in any part of the U.S., that a police presence is always there. In fact, for me, as soon as you land in the U.S., you can feel the difference. And most people in the U.S. don't see that, they don't feel that because they don't have a basis of contrast. They don't even realize how much of a police state they live in. And so this is the reality. Look, if people who can justify the kind of imperialist aggression we've seen emanating from the U.S. Over the last decades, you have to be very skeptical of their characterization of other nations, how they would characterize them as dictators and horrible and this and that, And we're talking about a nation, a U.S. state that imprisons more than 2 million of its own citizens, that every year its police forces murder black and brown people, a state that does not guarantee the elementary elements of human rights like healthcare, a state in which we're told that we are able to participate in elections, but what that really boils down to is voting for two parties already selected by a ruling class because of the disproportionate influence of money, et cetera, et cetera. So, the Iranian people are some of the nicest, I say, sweetest people that I know. I mean, and I'm really upset because, like yourself, I've been to that, and we both have been to that studio, and it's kind of surreal knowing you were in this place and to see how it's been devastated by these bombs in this illegal and unprovoked attack. And being in contact with friends in Iran who are now disconnected from their families, who have not been able to talk to now, Dimitri, in more than 24 hours because they had to disconnect from WhatsApp and they on the move in the city and even outside of the city. They didn't deserve this. The Iranian people have always raised the question: what have we done to the U.S.? Why is it that we just can't live in peace? Why do you all insist on intruding into our internal affairs? What is our crime? The same kind of questions we see emanating from the Palestinians. What have we done to deserve our people being burnt to death and tortured and bombed? What has been our crime? Well, your crime is you occupy land that these European Zionists, pimping religion, they want to take. That's your crime. It is being subjected to colonialism. So that's why we make the argument in the Black Alliance for Peace that the U.S. and Israel, operating as rogue states, represent an existential threat to collective humanity. And that's why the entire world, and people in the West don't seem to understand this, that's why the entire world is cheering on Iran. And they don't understand why. Well, because all of us who've been subjected to Western civilization at the end of a bayonet or in the holds of a slave ship, it seems like this time you bit off more than you can chew.
I have to concur with everything you said. I readily concur, and I particularly the point you made about the kindness of the Iranian people. I was really impressed by their hospitality and how soft-spoken they were and courteous. And in fact, Ajamu, each one of us had as I understood it, the organizers assigned a journalist to sort of be our guide. In my case, it was a young journalist from Press TV by the name of Alireza Akbari. And after I left Tehran, he and I remained in regular contact. And since the bombing of the complex, I've not been able to make contact with him. So I'm hoping that he's safe, and that if he hears this conversation, to know that we stand with him in solidarity and his fellow journalists from the state media broadcaster. And before I let you go, Ajamu, you mentioned another organization you've become involved with at the beginning. Forgive me, but I forgot the name of it. Could you please tell us about that organization, and also where people can find your outstanding analysis on politics and geopolitics?
Well, it's a new project that the Black Alliance for Peace has developed. It is the North-South Project for People-Centered Human Rights. And I'm the new director of that project. It's a project to recoup, if you will, or to decolonize the concept of human rights. It's quite clear that what the West defines as human rights is quite limited and, in fact, backward. And so you can get information on that at peoplecenteredhumanrights.com. And you can join the global alliance that we're developing. We're developing a global alliance for people-centered human rights. So please check us out at that website. And also, please continue to follow the Black Agenda Report, where you can get our analysis of some of my pieces. And I'm still on Twitter at Ajamu Baraka. Please follow me, because I'm still being shadow banned.
Thank you very much, comrade, for joining me again today, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you for having me.
And this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Montreal on June 19th, 2025.